Hey, amazing viewers! Before we go into this riveting narrative, drop your location in the comments below. We love connecting with you all around the world. Also, if this is your first time here, press the subscribe button and join our incredible journey. Let's hit 10,000 subscribers this month together. Your support means everything. The arrest that changed everything. The road stretched before him, an empty ribbon of asphalt winding through a forgotten town. Darius Carter adjusted his grip on the steering wheel, his mind still buzzing from the high of a successful business pitch. It had been one of his best, sharp, confident, and backed by months of meticulous preparation. Now, all that stood between him and a well-earned evening at home was this quiet stretch of road through Mill Creek, a town he had never heard of before. His Mercedes S-Class glided smoothly over the pavement, the late afternoon sun reflecting off its polished black surface. The GPS had promised this route would cut 30 minutes off his drive, but something about the silence unsettled him. The kind of silence that didn't feel peaceful, it felt watchful. A "Welcome to Mill Creek" sign passed by his window. Faded letters, peeling paint, population 15,000. The kind of place where strangers didn't go unnoticed. He had been to places like this before, where the old ways never change, where power belonged to the same families for generations, and where people who looked like him had to be careful. Still, he had nothing to fear. He was Darius Carter, a respected businessman, a self-made man. He glanced at his fuel gauge. Quarter tank. Enough to make it home, but just barely. A gas station appeared on his right, looking like it hadn't been updated in decades. Old-fashioned pumps. A convenience store with a flickering neon sign. Two elderly men sat outside on wooden chairs, their conversation halting as they spotted his car. A woman at a nearby SUV hurried to load her groceries, glancing his way before closing her trunk with more force than necessary. Darius sighed. He had seen this movie before. Keeping his composure, he pulled into the station, stepping out with the quiet confidence that had won him countless negotiations. He smoothed his tailored jacket, adjusted his Italian silk tie, and walked toward the pump. The silence thickened. Inside the store, the clerk, a thin man with a patchy beard, watched him with an expression that wasn't quite a scowl, but wasn't welcoming either. Darius approached the counter, sliding his platinum card forward. "Pump 4, he said, his voice even. The clerk took the card reluctantly, swiped it, and shoved it back without a word. "You passing through?" The words carried weight. This wasn't small talk. This was something else. Darius met the man's gaze. "Yes, sir. Just getting gas and heading home." The clerk didn't respond, just gave a slow nod, his eyes never leaving Darius as he stepped back outside. The feeling was getting stronger now, something just beneath the surface. Across the street, a police cruiser sat idly. Two officers inside, watching, waiting. Darius inhaled slowly, forcing his hands to remain steady as he filled his tank. The gas pump clicked rhythmically, each sound echoing in the eerie quiet. He had never been one to spook easily, but instincts weren't something he ignored. And right now, his instincts told him to leave. His phone vibrated in his pocket. "Jordan, how'd the meeting go?" A small smile crossed his lips. His older brother never failed to check in. Darius knocked it out of the park, taking the shortcut home. "This town gives me weird vibes, though." Jordan's response came immediately. "Jordan, stay safe, little brother. Call if you need anything." If only he knew. Darius finished fueling, got back into his car, and eased onto the road. The police cruiser followed. He checked his mirrors, keeping his hands steady at 10 and 2. The cruiser stayed at a careful distance, never too close, never too far. A predator waiting for the right moment to strike. He made sure to obey every traffic law to the letter. Speed limit. Exactly. Signals. Perfectly timed. There was nothing. Nothing they could pull him over for. Or so he thought. Red and blue lights flashed in his rearview mirror. Darius exhaled slowly. Here we go. He signaled, pulled over, and placed his hands where they could be seen. A tall officer approached, his nameplate reading Langley. Another officer, shorter, bulkier, stayed behind, hand resting on his belt. Langley rapped on the window. License and registration. Darius complied, moving slowly, deliberately. May I ask why I'm being stopped, officer? Langley barely glanced at the documents before tucking them away. Tail lights out. Darius frowned. That's impossible. I had the car serviced last week. Langley's partner, Officer Decker, circled the car, peering at the back with exaggerated interest. Step out of the vehicle. Darius hesitated. Officer, Langley's hand drifted toward his holster. Now. Darius had no choice. He stepped out, keeping his movements calm, controlled. The gravel crunched beneath his expensive shoes. Decker grinned. Look what I found. In his gloved hand, a small plastic bag. White powder. Darius's stomach clenched. That's not mine. His voice was firm. Langley smirked. Of course it isn't. Darius felt his pulse hammer in his ears. He had seen enough cases, heard enough stories. This wasn't random. This was routine. They had done this before, and they expected him to react the same way everyone else had. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that Darius Carter was not like their usual victims. He wasn't alone. And before this night was over, they would regret every decision they had just made. Because Darius had a brother who could and would burn their entire world to the ground. The machine that swallowed innocence. The handcuffs locked around Darius Carter's wrists with a practiced efficiency that spoke of experience. Too much experience. The metal was cold, biting into his skin, and yet he barely felt it. His mind was already racing ahead, calculating, adapting. He had spent his entire life mastering the art of reading a room, negotiating deals, and dismantling obstacles. This was just another obstacle. But what made this one different, what made it dangerous, was that it wasn't built for negotiation. It was a machine. A machine designed to crush, to consume, to destroy. And he had just been fed into its gears. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law, Officer Decker recited lazily as he shoved Darius toward the police cruiser. Darius didn't resist. He had nothing to prove to these men. Nothing to gain from a struggle. He had seen enough cases, enough stories. He knew how the game was played. This was not about guilt or innocence. It was about control. Langley smirked, his thumb pressing down just a little too hard on Darius's shoulder as he guided him into the back seat of the cruiser. You boys in suits always think you're untouchable. Darius met his gaze through the rearview mirror. You have no idea who you're messing with. Langley's smirk faltered. Just for a second. Then the door slammed shut. The drive to the station was short, but suffocating. Outside the tinted windows, Mill Creek rolled past, a town frozen in time, where faded storefronts whispered of better days and streetlights flickered like they, too, were running out of hope. Darius paid attention to everything. The streets, the turns, the road signs, every single piece of information that might matter later. Decker glanced at him through the mirror. You're real quiet back there. Darius didn't reply. Not gonna start yelling about your rights. Langley added, his tone almost mocking. That's what most of you do. Most of you. Darius smiled. Not the kind of smile that reached his eyes. The kind that made men like Langley uncomfortable without them even knowing why. Tell me, Darius said finally, his voice calm. How long have you been doing this? Langley's fingers flexed on the steering wheel. Doing what? Darius tilted his head slightly, as if genuinely curious. This routine, the fake traffic stop, the planted evidence, the way the DA is already involved before I even get processed. Silence. Decker's jaw tightened. Darius exhaled through his nose. nodding slightly. Yeah, that's what I thought. Langley forced out a chuckle. You watch too many movies, hotshot. You think the justice system is some big conspiracy against you. Darius looked back out the window. Not a conspiracy. Just a machine. Langley scoffed. And what does that make you? Darius smiled again. This time, it was real. The wrench. The station was exactly what he expected. Small, underfunded, but not struggling. The kind of place that looked worn down by design, so when people disappeared into it, nobody cared. Inside, the air smelled of stale coffee, disinfectant, and something else. Something human. Sweat, desperation, the metallic tang of fear. A desk sergeant barely looked up from his paperwork as they dragged Darius in. What's the charge? Langley dropped Darius's license onto the desk with a flick of his fingers. Drug possession. Tail light violation. The sergeant looked up then, finally noticing Darius's suit, the platinum card still in his pocket, the entire wrongness of him being here. This one's different, the sergeant muttered. Langley shrugged. They all think they are. Darius said nothing. He let them process him. Let them take his fingerprints. Let them take his belt and watch. It was all part of the process, part of their routine. What they didn't realize was that this wasn't routine for him. He wasn't another helpless victim. He was something they had never encountered before. A man with power. A man with a brother. They led him to a cell, pushing him inside with the same casual force they'd probably used on every other man who had stood where he now stood. The door clanged shut. Darius turned, scanning the room. Small, bare, a single metal bench bolted to the wall, a stainless steel toilet in the corner. The walls were covered in faint scratches, names, dates, messages carved by past occupants. It wasn't the first cell he had been in, but it would be the last. Langley leaned against the bars. You should get comfortable. D.A. Clayton is coming down personally. Darius raised an eyebrow. He must be a busy man. Langley smirked. He likes to handle cases like yours himself. Cases like mine. Darius understood the game. The machine didn't just run on corruption. It ran on habit. They had done this so many times before that they didn't even bother hiding it. His phone call would come. And when it did, everything would change. Outside the cell, the station hummed with quiet activity. Footsteps. Papers shuffling. A radio crackling. Darius sat on the bench, resting his elbows on his knees, his fingers interlocked. He had learned long ago that silence was a weapon. It made men nervous. Langley and Decker spoke in hushed voices near the front desk. The sergeant occasionally glanced at him. They were trying to figure him out, trying to decide if they had made a mistake. Because the truth was, the machine only worked when it was invisible, when its victims were too powerless, too afraid to fight back. Darius was neither. Hours passed. Darius knew he was being tested. They were waiting to see if he would crack, if he would beg for a deal, if he would act the way every other innocent man had acted before him. He didn't. Instead, he waited. And when the officer finally came to offer him his phone call, he didn't rush. He stood up slowly, straightened his suit, and followed the guard with the same calmness he had used in every boardroom. The machine had just made a mistake. It had let him make a call. Darius picked up the phone, dialed the number he had memorized years ago, and pressed it to his ear. His brother answered on the first ring. Darius. Jordan Carter's voice was sharp, alert. They arrested me, Darius said simply. Silence. Then his brother's voice, colder than Darius had ever heard it. Where? Darius smiled. Mill Creek. The machine had been running smoothly for years. But tonight, the gears were about to grind to a halt. The call that shook the system. The dial tone barely lasted a second before Jordan Carter answered. Darius? His brother's voice was sharp, controlled, but beneath it, there was an unmistakable edge. Darius exhaled, gripping the receiver just a little tighter. They got me. Silence. Not the kind that meant confusion or hesitation. The kind that meant calculation. A pause that wasn't empty but filled with thought, with strategy. "Where?" Jordan finally asked. "Mill Creek," Darius replied, his voice calm, as if he were discussing a business deal rather than his own wrongful arrest. "They planted drugs in my trunk, claimed it was in plain sight." Jordan cursed under his breath. Not a word wasted. Then, just 3 more. "Are you safe?" Darius leaned against the wall, glancing toward the officer watching him from the doorway. He wasn't safe. Not yet. But he wasn't broken either. "I'm holding." Jordan's voice changed, the mask of older brother concern giving way to something colder. "Give me the names," he ordered. Darius didn't hesitate. Officers Langley and Decker. Sergeant at the front desk. Name unknown. D.A. Clayton is personally involved. Another pause. Then Jordan exhaled, long and slow. "They really don't know who they're messing with, do they?" A small smile tugged at Darius's lips. "They think I'm just another easy target." Jordan didn't laugh. He didn't say anything for a moment. And when he finally spoke, his words were deliberate. "You listen to me," he said, his voice lowering. "Don't fight them. Don't argue. Don't resist. Keep your head down and your mouth shut. I know the drill." "I'm not talking about the usual drill, D." Jordan interrupted, his voice carrying an urgency that sent a chill down Darius's spine. "I'm talking about surviving. These small-town operations, they run deep. They don't just arrest people. They bury them." Darius glanced toward the bars of his cell, watching as Langley leaned against the station's front desk, laughing about something with Decker. They weren't worried. They weren't even trying to hide it. He turned his back to them and whispered into the receiver, "How long do I have?" Jordan's answer was immediate. "Not long. They'll try to break you before I get there." Darius clenched his jaw. "And what are you going to do?" Jordan's voice was cold steel. "I'm going to burn their machine to the ground. Elsewhere, miles away." Jordan Carter didn't waste time. He didn't have the luxury. The moment he hung up, he was moving. His office was already empty. His aides had left for the night, and his secretary had only just stepped out. That was good. Fewer witnesses, because what he was about to do wasn't something that could be done in the light. Jordan Carter was more than just Darius's older brother, more than just a lawyer, more than just a man who had clawed his way into the highest offices of justice. He was the United States Attorney General, and he was about to show Mill Creek exactly what that meant. Within seconds, he was on another call, this one to an old friend, a contact not listed in any public directory, a man who owed him a favor. The voice that answered was gruff. "Carter, this better be good." "It's not good," Jordan said, already packing his briefcase. "It's about my brother." That was all it took. The wheels of power started turning. Back at the station, Darius had been placed back in his cell, but the air had changed. Something was shifting. He could feel it in the way Langley and Decker kept glancing at him, their smugness fading just a little. In the way the sergeant at the front desk kept checking his phone. The machine was running into something it hadn't expected. Resistance. Darius leaned back against the wall, watching, waiting. An hour later, the station's front door slammed open. Not in a rush, not in anger, but in the kind of way that made people stop what they were doing. A silence spread through the room as a group of men entered, men in dark suits, with expressions that didn't entertain nonsense. One of them approached the desk sergeant. "Where is he?" Langley stood up, frowning. "Who the hell are you?" The man in the suit didn't even glance at him. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a badge. FBI. Darius exhaled slowly. Now things were getting interesting. Langley swallowed hard. "This is a local matter," he tried, his voice losing just a hint of confidence. The agent turned to him, his expression unreadable. Not anymore. Behind him, the station's phone rang. The sergeant picked it up, his face paling almost instantly. Darius could hear the voice through the receiver, even from his cell. It was Jordan. And he was furious. "You have 30 seconds to open that cell and hand my brother the phone." Jordan's voice rang through the station, commanding, unwavering. "Or I swear to God, I will make sure every single person involved in this is wearing orange jumpsuits by sunrise." Silence. Then a metallic click. The cell door swung open. Darius took the receiver. Jordan's voice was waiting on the other end. "You still there, D?" Darius smiled. "Yeah, I'm still here." And now? Now it was their turn to be afraid. The machine begins to crack. Darius Carter stepped out of the holding cell, his wrists sore from the handcuffs, but his spine straight. He had been through worse than this. He had faced boardrooms filled with men who doubted his intelligence, had walked into meetings where he was the only black man in the room, and still commanded the space. This was no different. Except, this time, the stakes were higher. This wasn't about a contract. This wasn't about money. This was about a system built to destroy men like him, a machine that had swallowed thousands before him, chewing them up and spitting them out into prison sentences they didn't deserve. But the machine had made a mistake. It had swallowed the wrong man. And now it was choking. The FBI agents who had stormed the station weren't here for show. They'd moved with precision, their presence shifting the air in the room. They carried authority like a blade, sharp and undeniable. The lead agent, a man in his early 50s with graying hair and eyes that had seen too much, turned toward the desk sergeant. "Darius Carter is coming with us." Now, Langley stepped forward, trying to reassert control. "Wait a damn minute." The agent didn't even let him finish. He held up a folder, flipping it open to reveal a document with an official stamp. Federal authority. Langley's mouth snapped shut. Langley's fists were clenched at his sides, his face red with barely suppressed rage. Decker was trying, and failing, to look like this was just another routine incident. And the sergeant? He looked like a man who had just realized his career was over. Darius took a slow breath, then turned toward the agent. "I want my phone back." The sergeant hesitated, then hurried to retrieve it. Darius took it, slid it into his pocket, and then, finally, he walked out. The cool night air hit him like a blessing. The street outside the station was quiet, too quiet, as if the whole town was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. A black SUV was parked at the curb. The back door opened. Jordan Carter stepped out. Darius had seen his brother in many forms. As a child, standing up to bullies twice his size. As a law student, spending sleepless nights fighting for a future no one believed he could have. As an attorney, tearing apart corrupt systems with nothing but words and unshakable confidence. But this version of Jordan, this was a man who was done playing games. His suit was immaculate, but his tie was slightly loosened, as if he had rushed to get here. His jaw was tight, his expression unreadable. But his eyes, burned with something deadly. Darius stepped toward him. "You made good time." Jordan didn't smile. "They tried to make you disappear." Darius nodded. "I know." For a long moment, the two brothers just looked at each other. Then Jordan exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. "Let's get out of here." Darius glanced back at the station one last time. He could see Langley watching from the doorway, his face dark with fury. He gave the officer a small, knowing nod, and then he got into the SUV. The ride back to the city was silent at first. Jordan sat beside him, his fingers tapping rhythmically against his knee, a habit he had when he was deep in thought. Darius finally broke the silence. "How bad is it?" Jordan let out a sharp laugh, shaking his head. "You have no idea." Darius raised an eyebrow. "Enlighten me." Jordan sighed. Mill Creek isn't just some small-town police department with a few bad apples. It's an operation. For the past 20 years, they'd been running a racket, pulling over black drivers, planting evidence, forcing plea deals. Most of the people they arrest don't have the resources to fight back. They get locked up, and the town profits. Darius's fingers curled into a fist. How many people? Jordan's jaw tightened. Hundreds. Maybe more. A slow rage built in Darius's chest. He had always known corruption existed. He had seen it, felt it. But this was systematic. This was a machine, and it had to be destroyed. What's the plan? Darius asked. Jordan glanced at him, a slow, dangerous smile forming. Oh, we're not just going to expose them. Darius's own lips curled. We're going to make sure they never do this to anyone again. By the time they reached Jordan's office, it was well past midnight. But inside, the lights were on, and a team of lawyers, investigators, and federal agents were already working. Jordan stepped inside, and immediately, a man in a dark suit approached him. Sir, we have confirmation. Judge Patterson has been signing off on these cases without reviewing the evidence. The DA is complicit. The entire system is compromised. Jordan nodded. Then we take them all down. Darius crossed his arms. How long before they realize they're in trouble? Jordan smirked. They already do. At that exact moment, Darius's phone vibrated in his pocket. A text. From an unknown number. You should have just taken the arrest. You have no idea what you've started. Darius showed it to Jordan. His brother read it, then chuckled. A deep, humorless sound. Oh, I love when they panic. Darius leaned back, exhaling. So what now? Jordan's smile didn't fade. Now, he picked up his phone and dialed a number. We let them watch their empire crumble. And then, as the call connected, he spoke the words that would set everything in motion. This is the United States Attorney General. I'm calling to authorize an official federal investigation into the town of Mill Creek. The machine had run unchecked for 20 years. But tonight, it had met the one thing it couldn't handle. Justice. Darius resisted the urge to smirk. The moment he had spoken to Jordan, this outcome had been inevitable. His brother wasn't just an attorney. He was the Attorney General, the highest legal authority in the country. And that meant no backwater police department in a corrupt town was going to lay a finger on Darius without consequences. Mr. Carter, the agent said, turning toward him. You're free to go. Darius nodded but didn't move immediately. His eyes scanned the room, taking in every face, memorizing every detail. The machine grinds to a halt. Mill Creek woke up to a reality it had never known. It started in the early hours of the morning, just as the town was stirring, just as the routines of power were about to begin their daily cycle. But this morning was different. This morning, the machine jammed. At precisely 5:45 a.m., a convoy of black SUVs rolled into town, unmarked vehicles, dark suits, federal agents who moved with quiet precision. By 6:00 a.m., the Mill Creek Police Department was surrounded. By 6:15 a.m., officers Langley and Decker were in handcuffs, their own Miranda rights read back to them by men who did not care about their badges. By 6:30 a.m., District Attorney Clayton was escorted from his office, his face pale as he was informed that he was under federal investigation for conspiracy, falsification of evidence, and abuse of power. By 7:00 a.m., Judge Patterson, the same judge who had never met a black man he couldn't convict, was removed from his bench, his chambers raided for records, his files combed through with ruthless efficiency. By 7:30 a.m., Mill Creek's corruption was no longer a secret. By 8:00 a.m., it was national news. Darius Carter stood outside his brother's office, watching the headlines flash across the television screen. Breaking NEWS. FBI says down some Old Town Police Department in massive corruption sting. His name wasn't in the reports. Not yet. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that the machine had finally been exposed, and it wasn't coming back. Jordan stepped beside him, sipping a coffee like he hadn't just orchestrated the most devastating legal takedown of his career. They'll talk about this for years. Darius exhaled. Good. Jordan studied him for a moment. You don't look satisfied. Darius shook his head. Because this isn't the only town like this. Jordan's jaw tightened. No, it's not. The machine wasn't just in Mill Creek. It was everywhere. In other towns, other cities, other systems built to break people, to crush them before they ever had a chance to fight back. Darius turned to his brother. So what's next? Jordan smirked. We do it again. Darius laughed softly, shaking his head. You make it sound easy. Jordan's expression turned serious. It's not easy. It never will be. But we have something they don't. Darius raised an eyebrow. What's that? Jordan took another sip of coffee, staring at the screen where the Mill Creek Police Department was now being swarmed by federal agents. The ability to fight back. For years, the machine had operated without resistance. It had picked its victims carefully, ensuring that no one had the power to stop it. But this time, it had chosen the wrong man. And now it would never be the same again. Because sometimes corruption doesn't need a hero. Sometimes it just needs the wrong man in handcuffs. And that man had just started a war. Epilogue. 1 year later, the machine was still breaking. It had started with Mill Creek, but it didn't end there. Across the country, cases were being reopened. Towns that had operated like Mill Creek were now under federal scrutiny. Judges, officers, district attorneys, people who had built their power on injustice, were now the ones facing charges, and at the center of it all, a quiet initiative led by two brothers, one who understood the law, one who understood what it meant to be its victim. Together, they weren't just exposing the machine, they were tearing it apart, piece by piece, city by city, until there was nothing left. This concludes the story. Thank you for watching until the end. I hope you found it enjoyable. If you did, please consider liking the video and sharing it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell for more captivating stories. Have a great day.